Still plenty of assertion.
Because I've been invited, I'll add a little bit more to that, and hopefully from a policing delivery perspective as well. So as has been said, I'm the National Police Chiefs Council lead for children and young people, and the way that works, for those that don't know, is lots of us are chief constables, chief officers, and we divvy up policy areas, both to drive policy development on behalf of UK policing, but also to be the voice and to create the connection. Because, as you'll know, the breadth of the mission of policing is very, very wide, and we need to kind of really embrace the local, which Police Forces does, but make sure we have that cross-UK perspective. So I've been the national lead for children and young people for 5 years, and over that time, we've developed a national strategy for child-centred policing. It's all available online, and every police force now does that to varying degree, as you would expect, but it's very much rooted now in practical UK policing practice. And we have made a huge inroad, I think. And in the period before lunch, I want to share a few thoughts with you. Some areas where we have made some really good progress about engaging with young people. Some areas I still worry about, because there are some. Where there are, I think, forthcoming opportunities, particularly in locality, around working alongside our partners. And also where I think we've got a better opportunity universally to engage with children and young people. And that's one of the big themes that I will keep coming back to. That actually we have this real dilemma between acute services, like lots of public sector services do, acute services and universal services. And I want to talk about both, because they don't always come up with the same answer. So we have acute engagement opportunities, teachable moments, as Ben described them, but also those universal engagement opportunities in order to build good citizenship and to build legitimacy and challenge of this and future generations into their policing. So I'm going to talk, first of all, a little bit about the very, very tiny proportion of young people who have committed offences. They are a tiny proportion, but they get an awful lot of the attention. We're now across the UK arresting 3/4 fewer young people than we did 10 years ago. It has plummeted. That is a really good thing. Whilst a lot of our police custody areas we are making them as humane as can be done, they are still really frightening environments for a young person, and they are not the place, unless we really need to take a young person. So that's a really good thing. But I think also, in my personal view, what's driven that, there's a whole load of things, but one of them is this deliberate and very material shift in policing away from offences and numbers of offences to harm. The conversations we have in policing are very different. I've been a chief officer for 10 years, and I can really feel the difference of the quality of the conversation that we now have. So we arrest very, very many fewer. And therefore, the vast majority of young people who come into the arms of the police because they have offended in one way or another, very much around voluntary attendance, very much about out-of-court disposals. And that is in order to, yes, address what has happened. We're not soft, but very much to prevent it happening again and to understand and to help a young person make wiser and better choices. But there are, of course, some we still arrest. Often they're involved in the most serious, the most complex crimes, and they often have very complex needs themselves. The two are often absolutely linked. So we need to think as a profession very purposefully about that opportunity we have with the young person to make the most of that teachable moment. So there's loads of things with liaison and diversion and health practitioners and youth workers where they exist to really help facilitate a young person on a different path and to help them move away from offending behaviour. We've talked about in the questions and in the presentations about county lines. We need to, and we do have very different conversations with young people now. We ask them are they feeling safe? So yes, we deal with the behaviour, but how are they feeling? Are they feeling safe? And you'll know, many people in this room will know, that many young people who are involved in county lines are dealt with as trafficked young people, abused, groomed young people, as opposed to offenders with a big O. So we do try and do that. And we try and make sure the conversation we're having with the young person addresses that and looks behind the behaviour. And the Police Foundation's Policing in Young Adults, which is on the note in the packs, gives lots of examples of practice of addressing young people's behaviour and helping them engage around risky behaviour. We do, of course, need to deal with the offence, and we do, not least of which there is usually and often another victim on the end of it. So we do have to get that balance right. But by looking at the circumstances of a young person's life that has brought them into the arms of the police, does make us come up with a very different answer. There is loads of work going on across policing now, many of whom in this room are very familiar with it, around adverse childhood experiences, and it really does help us understand why a young person has exhibited the behaviour, committed the offending they have done. And we need to be the professionals in the room rather than just mopping up the difficulties. And I don't think it's a surprise. If you live as a young person with fear, with illness, with hunger, I don't think it's a surprise that your mental health is impacted and your ability and resilience is impacted. That's not a surprise. One of the groups that we particularly focus on are young people who have a parent in prison, and that does not make happy reading. We know that amongst adults in prison, nearly 2/3 of male prisoner sons will go on to offend themselves. That's a really sorry state. So while all this universal service, which I'll come on to, we really need to focus on and do on the young people who are, really need attention. And when we've worked with a group of young people who have had a parent in prison, they've told us that they've often witnessed their parent being arrested. It's been very difficult, very traumatic, and particularly so if it's their mother. They said that the police officers coming into the home are really loud and scary. We saw some of that imagery. And we've got an adult man now who told us, and it's a very clear recollection for him as a very young child, the police came into his house, no doubt to do a drugs warrant, and they ripped the head off his teddy bear. He has never forgotten that. And we can all empathise with that. He has never forgotten that. Now, of course, there's a very practical procedural reason they needed to look in that teddy bear, I'm sure. But it was the way that it was done, the utter disregard, in my view, for the impact, the profound impact that behaviour had. And frankly, he hated the police from there on in. So we missed, all those years ago, a very teachable moment. Last week, though, to give a happier news, I had an email forwarded from one of my inspectors from a survivor of domestic abuse who'd gone through many years of abuse and also gone through the criminal justice system. And she wrote in to the inspector just to thank the staff and the officers who'd been alongside her for that period, and particularly to thank them for the impact on her 5-year-old son, who had seen his daddy arrested several times, and he still thought the police were really good, and when he grows up, he wants to be one. That's a real shift. It doesn't happen all the time. I'm not standing here saying it is perfect, but it does happen. That's all about the trauma-informed way that those officers and investigators went about their business. So we know that intervening early changes the outcomes for children living with multiple adverse childhood experiences. We know that. So I want to focus a little bit on that partnership world and what does that mean. There's been lots of change very recently about the whole place service provision, about whole place approach to risk and to harm, which I think is massively welcome. We've had the Serious Violence Strategy, Youth Endowment Fund. These are really, I think, serious efforts to get us cross-sector within a geography to work together alongside the same harms. I think it happens really well at a local basis, and I mean kind of upper tier authority, borough authority level. My sense is, my personal view is there's still a gap at the national level. We don't have that joined up nature across public health, SOLAS, policing in the national way that we do. And I look with green eyes, actually, at Wales and Scotland, who I think do that really, really well. But that public health approach to resolving crime and community problems, and the public health duty, which is coming into force next year, I think is really exciting. It shifts all of us, police, local authorities, local health bodies, education representatives, youth offending services, the list goes on. It requires us all to look at harm and to look at safeguarding together in a very different way, rather than in the slices that even with our best efforts in the past we perhaps had. So I'm very excited about that. And that sharing of data and intelligence and information. And it's going back to George's point this morning about the transparency of the information we have, really helping with the legitimacy that we all hold and that balance between what the public are interested in and what's in the public interest that George put so well first thing. And that new duty next year will hold organisations to account rather than individuals, again, which within professions, and I can only speak for my own, takes a lot of fear out. People can make 1,000 great decisions, but it's the one they get wrong that will hang them out to dry, and they're really scared of that. And I'm sure that's the same across many other professions. So this shifts the onus to organisational rather than individual level, which is a good thing. But violent crime, and it's come up a lot in our questions, is plaguing our communities. And my personal reflection is I've been a Chief Constable for 4 years. When I first started 4 years ago, I would have a couple of knife incidents a week. I now have a couple of knife incidents a day, and I cover Hampshire, Portsmouth, Southampton and the Isle of Wight. My custody inspectors will say they pretty much only deal with knives now, one way or another, in the custody blocks. And I'm doing an award ceremony, which I always love, this Friday, and I signed all the certificates for bravery and interventions by my officers and staff, and pretty much every single one was for a knife. So there is a sizable and material shift into the real world violence that is going on. So that point around the partnership working very well locally, and in terms of our engagement locally, that works. I think we could do with it being reinforced at a national level as well. Another group I worry about, beyond those with a parent in prison, is the young people who are in our looked after system, children in care. There has been a massive shift since your party parliamentary group of a few years ago in 2014. Their report, and there have been subsequent reports following up Lord Laming, Sir Martin Neri, and a protocol developed by DFE only last year. That's really, really welcome. It's really good news. But we still know that children in care are 5 times more likely than their peers to have a formal criminal justice outcome for the same behaviour. And we need to be really thoughtful and challenge that. Now, I don't know if it's because of the trauma they've experienced, means that they're less trusting, they're less willing to talk about what's gone on. Is it the way that we as corporate parents support them? And there will be all sorts of other reasons. But regardless of that, the facts are still 5 times more. There's lots of good examples around the country of policing, of children's homes, of local authorities doing great stuff to address that. But we haven't got that good practice as common practice yet. But we carry on. But also one of the shifts that I think we have seen, even within the looked after children community, is now a quarter of looked after kids are over 16 years of age. They have different needs. They've shifted to that older group. And that sense of legitimacy and engagement, we need to do different things with them as well. And we had a more recent all-party parliamentary group. We had their report into missing young people called No Place at Home very recently, which talked about how many young people are placed out of area for really good safeguarding reasons, to stop them being abused, to stop them being groomed, to get them away from the really difficult and dangerous influences they've been living with. And that's really good reason. What it does, though, is it increases their risk of being exploited in the new area. It cuts their ties with the education and the support services they've had, and they have to start again, often at the bottom of a list. And from a policing perspective, to engage with young people who have a really acute need of engagement with their police, we don't know they're there until we have crisis point, until they've come in to the arms of the police. And that makes it really tricky for us to do anything, frankly, until a young person is either really scared or has come to real harm or is harming someone else. It's really hard for us to do that because we don't know whether they're there. And we know, on the accounts for looked after children, just how heartbreaking some of them is, and their background is so, so awful. So I've talked there a lot about young people who have come into contact themselves with the police, either because they've been vulnerable to something, they're living with something where the police have come along, they've caused harm to someone else. So that is a particular group. But there's also all the others, the universal offer that policing still has for our wider citizenship. And so we asked more broadly, what do young people want from their police in terms of engaging with us? And I think we can link this to another point that George made about that growing well, the 20,000 new officers and new staff, 6,500 that will be coming in. We need to grow well. And in order to grow well, what we find is that young people who already know someone in the police are really happy to come and work for us. And when we've had 10 years of austerity and shrinking, we've kind of not had to work that hard. I think it is a massively exciting and wonderful welcome opportunity to make sure we grow well. And we now have the challenge of recruiting and bringing people into us who perhaps have had nothing to do with the police at all before. And we need to make ourselves an employer of choice for them. So I do think there's an opportunity around that confidence. Because what we know is, from the research that we've done, is that people, generally worry about the police. It's exactly what Ben was saying. This sense of what the police are differs massively from their lived experience. And of course, most young people have nothing to do with the police. They don't come into our lives and we don't come into theirs, more importantly. So we did a huge bit of work. We spoke with 5,000 young people, asked them their views. And what we found was over half of the young people said, we really want the police to engage with us where we are, i.e., for most, in a school environment. That's where we want the police to come, in our schools and our colleges. And 80% of young people said, and we want to have a social media presence that we can trust, that isn't dad dancing, excuse my phraseology, mum dancing counts too, but that actually we can trust so that we can get the questions we want answered from an organisation that we trust, because that police brand is a very strong brand. So we had some transformation funding from the Home Office, hooray, and we developed a national youth engagement project, which has done a couple of things. So the first thing is we've developed a partnership with the PSHE Association to really get under and understand the benefits, or otherwise, of policing, the wider police family in the classroom, so we can understand how policing supports the national curriculum in a relevant way. Ben Bradford's been working with us, and he's leading the evaluation of the impact of that from a procedural justice perspective. As part of that, we've developed a handbook on good practice in the classroom. We're training loads and loads and loads of officers and police staff who do go into the classroom around young people. We're not teachers. We don't pretend to be teachers. And we also need schools to understand the boundaries of our skill set and our relevance as well. It's a two-way street there. And we're also not security guards. And we can sometimes, in bad examples, find that going on. But we're doing that evaluation. And if the evidence is there that we're making that difference, then that gives us a role within the College of Policing to develop a national curriculum within policing, to do that alongside the education sector and roll that out in a consistent way. Because right now, it's really patchy. And I cannot, hand on heart, currently articulate what works in a school environment for policing. And we need to do better than that. The other thing we're working on is guidance for schools about when to call us. I am actually really shocked and surprised by how little confidence in some school environments they have about when to call the police and what they can quite rightly and properly deal with themselves. So the appetite for that is huge, and it deals with things you'd expect, knives and sex and drugs and violence, domestic abuse and so on. But it's a really straightforward document which we'll be publishing very, very soon to help get that connection and that role between police and school environment sorted out. And then the third bit, which has been talked about a couple of times this morning, I'm pleased to hear, is all about engaging universally with young people through social media. So we've had a national policing Instagram programme going on since the spring, and that has been, when we've done the evaluation of this, really powerful in terms of young people coming and asking us questions of stuff they just want to know. That brand police that I spoke about. Yes, it has flushed out some hidden harm and been able to deal with that, and that's important that we should. But we've had some fantastically powerful stories of young people coming and asking us questions, the stuff they would have gone down a particular path because they just didn't know. And I'm very grateful for the support of organisations like NSPCC, Prince's Trust, who are really good at this and have been really good advisors and challengers to us. And one example, when we had the recent climate march protests, we did some really good Instagram content which helped young people who were perhaps thinking about protesting, how to do it safely, how to do it lawfully. And the take-up of that was enormous. It's just answering the basics, but there was a vacuum, and we needed to fill that vacuum. So we are looking to roll that out. We are going to be seeking long-term funding. I think I'll be viewing Ben's trust and legitimacy as an asset as I go to various folk to try and get long-term funding for that. I'm being told to stop there, so I will. We are making progress towards child-centred policing. Our engagement, both at teachable moments and for the universal offer, is something we're very focused and very purposeful about. We know we need to be trustworthy in order to engage really well and to be able to deliver services for our 12 million community members who are under 18. They are our citizens too, and we need to deliver with them, not to them. And ultimately, we also want for the next generation to be growing active citizenships so that they will support their policing, as Ben said, but also challenge it so that we do have that legitimacy and we continue policing alongside people and not enforcing our will as goes on elsewhere around the globe. So I will stop there. Forgive me for running over just a little bit.